Welcome back to the Political Breakdown. How's it going? How's your day been? Today's episode is going to be a very important one, just like every one other. Welcome back to the Political Breakdown. How's it going? How's your day been? This is your host, Radell Lewis, and we're back at it again with another excellent and very important information episode to let you know what's going on in America, to let you know what's going on with the issues, and to have a deeper conversation beyond rhetoric, beyond misinformation, and beyond the political and encapsulament of both sides. Because over here we are advocating for political solutions without political bias. Now, I do want to also let you know, if you don't know already, that I will start establishing a more consistent schedule every Wednesday and Saturday. That is a hope, dropping 8 a.m. EST. Now, that consistent schedule will also hopefully start including guests, so we'll kind of make sure everything is getting worked out. I also want to remind you that we are allying ourselves with US Resist News as a feature on this nonprofit news service dedicated to truthful reporting in an age of disinformation. Learn more at www.usresistnews.com. You can see all my content there, and I really advocate for a platform that is really trying to push unbiased information. I always say political solutions without political bias. And I'll keep on reiterating, that doesn't mean that I don't have opinions on either side at any given political point. That means I don't let identity determine all of my values. My values are my own. And in order for me to be as informed, or the most informed, I need information, I need resources, I need sources that's giving me the raw facts without any political sway. And right I'm here, I'm going to give you the raw facts. I'm also going to give you my opinion. I'm going to differentiate when it is my opinion and my interpretation of the information. But that at the end of the day, if you disagree with me or if you want to have a conversation with me, feel free to go to my email, thetrendgoldenfaith@gmail.com. You can find the link in the description, and we can talk in on a future podcast episode. So today there's plenty of things to talk about. I do want to start it off by saying that I've been reading this book, and this is probably going to be a shorter episode, but it's called Side by Side. And this book basically is informing me about the Israeli and Palestinian conflict and their history. And I'm doing this for a project that I'm a part of. And reading this book really kind of emphasized a couple of things. I'm not going to go into the entire history in today's podcast episode. If you want me to, feel free to let me know. But I do want to bring up something that I noticed, and that's the power of a national identity. And I'm not necessarily correlating all three of these things, but I am making a point when it comes down to people who perceive their current situation as bad. They're not living their best version of their lives. They're maybe even suffering. Maybe it's even getting that bad where they can't even feed their families and, take care of their kids. Those people who are lost, who think of themselves as forgotten, who thinks the country has abandoned them. When I'm reading the book that I just referred to earlier, one thing that I noticed is that there are so many examples throughout human history when these people that I'm referring to get consolidated, find a certain level of solidarity through a national identity. And the examples I'm going to point you out, again, I'm not correlating them all as similar, but the point is that these people believed in this national identity and came together under this banner. That would include Zionism, because the Jewish people were spread all across the world. They were getting ostracized left, right, and center. It didn't help that World War II was one of the worst situations in Jewish history. They came under the umbrella of Zionism to find solidarity, a national identity to come together. Nazism, speaking of World War II, very similar, coming under that umbrella of the national identity of not being a Nazi. And to not as an extreme of an example, the MAGA movement. You would assume that just being American and living in a privileged American lifestyle is enough, but it's not to MAGA people. And it's such an interesting thing that you can really see that people want somewhere to belong. This sense of individuality that people are trying to espouse is actually non-existent. It doesn't really exist. People want to belong to somewhere. They want to belong into something they believe in. So the reason why I brought that out is not to say, oh yeah, they're all terrible. I mean, of course, Nazis are terrible, so that's not even a question. But the reason why I bring that up is I think it is about time that the center comes together under a identity. It can't just be the reasonable people of the center left and the reasonable Republicans that are not MAGA. No, there needs to be a unification of all these different organizations, of all these different principles that want to have a realistic, more efficient, a path forward in terms of political rhetoric and political solutions. They need to define this new wave. So I'm going to put out kind of another challenge. Because I believe the power of a national identity has been so pivotal and so important throughout history of humans. You can bring up the example of Zionism and how the Jews were treated until they came together under one umbrella. You can bring up the terribleness that is Nazism. You can bring up the MAGA movement coming together under the banner of Trump. Now it's time for a movement under the banner of not the Democrats and the perception that all they want to do is trans kids, and not MAGA, where all they want to do is be Donald Trump's. Do I want to be nice? Donald Trump's cheerleaders. That's the nicest way I can put it. We need a movement under a more moderate, centrist ideology, a true centrist, not a fake one that supports Trump, not just an anti-establishment individual. And my challenge is you political content creators out there who are tired of the woke left and the MAGA right controlling the narrative of politics. It's time for you to create that identity. Now, I would do it, but I don't have enough clout to do it. But the people like Destiny, of course, that exists out there, David Pakman that exists out there, disassociate yourself from the left or disassociate yourself from the right and come together under a new banner. A banner with real political reasoning. So that's just a challenge. I think establishing this identity is extremely valuable. But we'll see how things play out. I'll make this into a clip. I'll post it on my platform. I'll send the challenge out there and see if anyone bites. Make sure you guys push that as well. But let's talk about some of the issues. Let's talk about some of the information that I think you should be aware of. So the U.S. Supreme Court has to go over a couple of things. Recently, the U.S. Supreme Court heard arguments challenging the FDA's decision to block flavored e-cigarette products. The FDA has rejected over 1 million marketing applications for sweet flavored vapes, citing concerns over youth addiction. Triton, a company selling products like Rainbow Road and Creme Brulee, filed the challenge. Vaping companies argue their products help adults quit smoking and claim the FDA changed its requirements after applications were submitted. The FDA maintains that flavored e-cigarettes pose significant health risks to children, outweighing the potential benefits for adult smokers. Youth vaping levels are at their lowest in a decade, with 6% of middle and high school students using e-cigarettes, 90% of whom consume flavored products. The FDA has authorized the marketing of 34 e-cigarette products in tobacco and menthol flavors only. It's interesting. E-cigarettes, I don't really have a strong opinion about that. Initially, the assumption is that this was supposed to be a really great alternative to smoking cigarettes, but it's crazy that back in the day, smoking cigarettes was relatively normal. It wasn't too crazy, but people were overutilizing it and realizing the negative repercussions. At this point, anything that is supposed to influence your mood, that's supposed to influence and make you feel better, any substance like that, overutilized, overused, are all bad. It's not even a question on whether or not these substances are detrimental to your health. It's all these substances will become a detrimental to your health because you're overusing it to feel good. If you need something to cope with life, then that's a problem. So cigarettes, vaping, smoking weed, drinking alcohol, even taking some pills, popping some Molly, all of this is under the same umbrella of things that are trying to make you not feel as bad and trying to make you feel better about yourself. So does this mean anything in the long run in terms of these benefits? No, it doesn't. Because the negatives, of course, are there. And I'm completely in favor, 100% in favor, all the way across the board, which is why national standards for education is not a bad thing. We ban smoking at schools. There is no way that there is a good argument that smoking can benefit any child that is trying to get their education. So ban it all across the board. Ban smoking, ban drugs. All of that shouldn't be in schools in the first place. So that's just my 2 cents. We also have the US introducing new rules restricting the export of semiconductor manufacturing equipment and software tools to China. The new controls targets 24 types of manufacturing equipment, 3 software tools, and high band memory exports. Another 140 Chinese companies have been added to the U.S. Department of Commerce's entity list, affecting semiconductor manufacturers, tool producers, and investment firms involved in advancing Chinese military capabilities. Now, obviously, you want to put those limitations on China, make sure they're not getting certain chips, but the China is not going to stay back and allow this to be as it is. In return, China announced on Tuesday a ban on exports to the United States of gallium, germanium, and antimony, and other key high-tech materials with potential military applications. So this back and forth is going to continue. We'll see how everything kind of plays with, Donald Trump being in office and how he may or may not try to establish a worthwhile relationship with what is his name, Xi Jinping. That's a more of a wait and see, but because of the national security concerns, because of the kind of growing sentiment that China wants to create a coalition that challenges NATO and the United Nations, and because it's generally deemed all across the board that China is our biggest threat and our biggest enemy, this stuff will not end anytime soon. You know what I also find a little bit interesting is that when I am in a lot of space, especially on social media, it's funny to see the amount of people that are advocating in favor of China. And do I think that is necessarily a wrong thing? No, by any means. But social media provided that platform to allow people to, all intents and purposes, disrespect the United States of America, undermine it, decredit what it is, and then uplift China or uplift Russia. To see those type of conversations just being put in front of people, it really makes you question if that is the best for national security. Don't you think? At the very least, I raise the question. I don't want to limit or censor anybody by any means, but I think that is very important to consider. With that said, let's move on to something that doesn't mean much to me, but Republicans love to have the conversation. And what that conversation may be, you ask? Well, transgenders using bathrooms, of course, the most important issue of the day. So, Ohio's Republican Governor Mike DeWine signed Senate Bill 104, which bans transgender students from using school bathrooms that align with their gender identity. The law applies to K to 12 students and mandates that they use restrooms and locker rooms corresponding to their sex assigned at birth. It also prohibits transgender students from sleeping with peers of the same gender during overnight school events. I don't know what sleeping with peers of the same gender, I guess like sleeping in the same tent. I guess so. at the end of the day, I don't think that this should be a thing for the most part in schools. With these growing trans identity, I don't think you should have the ability to use bathrooms, especially if you're not passing, of the opposite sex. So I'm actually not mad at this rule. I mean, I always question the idea of these kids really knowing who they are in school. I mean, I don't think this happens on a large scale. I don't think this is really an issue. I do think when it comes to adults, who cares, especially in places where you can, at the bare minimum, create gender neutral bathrooms. But in schools, a place meant for learning, I'm not mad at it. I'm honestly not. I'm not upset with this. I think that this is not a terrible thing. This is not a great thing. I personally just don't care enough, and I think if Ohio wants to create this law for its own state, hey, it's fine by me. It's no skin off my bones. When they grow past 18, then I mean they'll just be living in the adult world and the rules will be a little bit different. But when you're in school, then you just gotta follow the rules. Simple as that. Speaking of gender affirming care and all that stuff, this does raise another question that's a little bit more important, much more impactful, and a conversation that is much more deep than someone using a bathroom. The Supreme Court is set to hear argument in a landmark case concerning minors' access to gender-affirming care. The case focuses on whether puberty blockers and hormone therapy should be available to minors experiencing gender dysphoria, with various state laws banning or limiting such treatments. This is where it gets very tough. Now, unpopular opinion, even though I criticize MAGA and a lot of things they do, you people on the left are going to hate me for this, but I'm just telling you what I think. Ultimately, when it comes to being transgender, when it comes to thinking that you are in the wrong body, I think any instance that it gets that deep, I 100% believe it's a mental illness. I think it's a situation where you believe in your heart of hearts you're in the wrong body. I can't perceive that anything beyond a mental illness. So, if you have gender dysphoria, that raises a different question, especially when it comes to these people who have the mental illnesses that their body is not correct in some way or fashion. I've mentioned, for example, being trans disabled or transabled, something like that, right? And the question is, these people are under a mental illness. Therapy is not going to make them change their mind, and trying to indoctrinate them to make them believe that they're wrong is also not going to work all the time. I think there's a valid argument that you should allow them to live out the way that their mind is saying. And a lot of this is due to trauma from their past, something that has affected them to make them think this way, of course. So, if I know that this is a mental illness, and I know that sometimes the best way to help these people is to allow them to live out their truth so they can live out a happy life, then the next question starts happening. The next part of the conversation starts happening, in the sense that should minors be allowed to have gender-affirming care and hormone therapy? Now, I think we all can agree, all across the board, that children should not be having surgeries. That's stupid, and if that's your position, I think you're an idiot. What gender-affirming care is, from my understanding, is something as simple as this person wants to be called a she or he. Pronouns. Labeling them the correct ones. That's, for the most part, that is what is considered gender-affirming care. Now, there's other aspects in terms of how they dress and all that stuff, but it's something that simple, right? Hormone therapy requires you to kind of take drugs. I'm against that too. No drugs. So, I don't agree with drugs. I don't agree with surgeries. But gender-affirming care, with just using different pronouns or allowing them to dress a certain way or just act a certain way. I don't see anything. I don't see a definitive answer on why this is right or wrong, especially if they're diagnosed with gender dysphoria. I think of it similarly to someone who's gay. They're a child, they're gay. Like they're 16, they're gay, right? You know how back in the day where Christians were unhinged and tried to get the gay out of them by sending them to these weird Christian boot camps? Come to find out, none of that shit worked. None of it. Not a single one. So I think if it's similar there, I mean, if this is how they need to live their life and it's diagnosable that they are under a gender dysphoria situation, why not? I get the argument against, I get the argument for, but if they have this mental illness, don't you want what's in the best interest of your child without allowing them to negatively affect their body? If this is at this moment, gender affirming care is an immediate solution. It's something that you can do immediately. It's not something that's harmful. Drugs and surgeries can affect them for the rest of their life, but gender affirming care, it won't. So, my final position, I want to make it very clear to kind of consolidate the points that I'm making. When it comes to hearing the arguments regarding gender affirming care for minors, I think there's a valid argument to be made that this is a good solution for people who have the mental illness of gender dysphoria. I don't believe that children should be taking drugs or surgeries in terms of changing their sex, their gender, whatever. But doing something as simple as calling them different pronouns to help them live the best life that they're suffering under when it comes to their mental illness, I don't see anything wrong with that. So that is my position in this conversation. Let's continue. Speaking of children, we're not done. We spoke about it before in the podcast, that Australia and their lawmakers were considering passing a law to ban social media for 16-year-olds. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're here. And now this is a domino effect to see if this is a precedent moving forward. Australian lawmakers have passed a pioneering law that bans individuals under the age of 16 from having social media accounts. The legislation, set to come into effect in November 2025, mandates that social media platforms like TikTok, Instagram, and X must take steps to verify users' ages. Failure to comply could lead up to fines up to 50 million Australian dollars. This law is considered one of the strictest in the world. I always, and I'll consistently say, banning social media is a short-term and short-sighted solution in dealing with social media. I think these teenagers are all still going to be able to access social media. I think these teenagers will all still use social media. And I think you could argue that it will be worse because now they'll be doing it behind their parents' back. They'll be doing it behind everybody's back. Knowing this, and knowing that social media is supposed to be an outlet to bring people together all across the world, I will continuously advocate, instead of a social media ban, we have two different social media platforms for children, for adults. That's simple as I can put it. The children version should have the most strictest and most security on it. The version for the adults, just be as chaotic as y'all want right now because X is a cesspool of BS. I think that is the best way to go about it. But Australia doesn't believe so. So we will see how everything kind of plays out, especially considering what the punishment will be if teenagers do go on social media. Will the parents get punished? And what will other countries think about this? And will they adopt a similar law into place? We shall see. The United Kingdom provided a circumstance, a very interesting ethical question Considering that lawmakers have given initial approval to a bill that will allow terminally ill adults to end their lives. And someone who's speaking on the bill's sponsor, Kim Lebeter, emphasized that it isn't about choosing between life and death, but about giving dying individuals a choice in how they die. I think I wanted to raise it because it's such a really interesting ethical question, especially with the government's involvement, so to speak, in assisting the death. Because if someone is terminally ill, then that means they're guaranteed to die. And if they don't want to live anymore, should they be forced to suffer? Right? Should they be forced to live out the last couple of months suffering until they die? And I think that is a valid conversation to have. But it always gets tricky once once the government gets involved into stuff like this. The government having some type of influence to end someone's life. And I'm not talking about a moral sense, but I'm talking about a more principle sense. The government taking an active role in helping someone end its life. I think for the most part, this point that was made regarding terminally ill adults, I agree with the sentiment. I agree that if someone wants to end their life prematurely because they don't want to suffer their last coming days, then they shouldn't have to, right? But the reason why this is such an interesting ethical question is because of potential dominoes that may fall later on of other potential conversations where the government's helping assist a self-inflicted demise. What if it's not a terminally ill patient, but what if it's a suicidal one? What if it's a clinically depressed one? What if it's someone who's all alone and don't want to live anymore? What if it's someone homeless and who just wants to, use their body for what they want to use their body for? I'll leave it at that. I think this enters into very interesting territory. And then, of course, there's a broader discussion regarding euthanasia and getting rid of children, like babies. And you find out, they're terminally ill. And the mother says, he's not going to live, just end his life. Like, what about that situation? It gets really tricky. I'm just going to raise this question to y'all. Now that the UK has passed a bill to help people who are terminally ill, who are suffering, and help them by assisting in their self-inflicted demise, how far should this go? What about a baby who's terminally ill? What about someone who's clinically depressed and wants to end it all? These are the conversations that may potentially happen in the future from this. So you just gotta see the bigger picture. Ultimately, I don't think the UK made a terrible decision. If you're religious, I can see why you think this is not okay, or if you're anti-establishment as well. But that's why this conversation is so interesting. I was going to talk about South Korea a little bit. South Korea had some weird stuff regarding martial law. I don't know too much into it, so I won't talk about it, but definitely something to keep your eye on. We had some back and forth with a former lieutenant colonel of the military saying that Trump and Elon Musk have been having very close ties with Putin, and Elon Musk says he's going to pay for what he has said. That's something to keep your eye on in terms of the military. Of course, we got Israel and Hezbollah supposed to be in a ceasefire agreement, but both of them are sending rockets at each other because they think both of them are breaking the ceasefire agreement. That's very mature. One thing I do want to show you, actually, I want you to listen to, and you can be shown it as well, I guess, is something in regards to Ukraine and Russia. I think it's very fascinating, personally. So I'm going to show a video here. So make sure you guys put your audio on because you can listen to it, or if you're watching the podcast, make sure you watch this portion. But this is me just reacting to something in particular in regards to potential what's the word? A potential agreement, compromise, a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia. So let's listen to this.
Security and defence analyst Michael Clark is here with me to discuss the significance of all of this. Michael, good morning to you. Good to see you. So firstly, what did you make of what Mark Rutte was saying?
Yeah, I mean, what he's saying in public now for the first time is, we're pretty sure, is what he said to Donald Trump on the 22nd of November, which is that the Europeans are going to make a bigger contribution to all things NATO, but that we've got to be prepared to be tough with Putin. And I think he was saying to Trump, we know, that, if it looks as if you've rolled over and given Putin what he wants, then it's not a great way to start your presidency looking like a sucker to a playground bully like Putin. And it will actually embolden all of your enemies. It will embolden China and North Korea and Iran.
That's a very interesting analysis, and I do think that is something to consider if you're on Trump's side, is that you are currently being depicted from the MAGA side as a strong leader that people fear, that people respect, that people take seriously. If you go into a negotiation where Putin, for the most part, gets everything that he wanted, now you can argue, does he get everything? He doesn't get all of Ukraine. Well, if he gets a large chunk of Ukraine and prevents them from joining NATO, I mean, this is a win-win for Putin. So there still needs to be that vigor, that strength that we're led to believe that Donald Trump has to make sure that the deal is fair for both sides. But let's continue.
So you've got to play it tough. And the phrase is also escalate to de-escalate. You've actually got to put Putin under enough pressure to bring him to the table, because at the moment, statements coming out of the Kremlin, or statements around the Kremlin, people who are speaking as if on behalf of the Kremlin, indicate that Putin may overplay his hand. So they're being very assertive. Russian statements are very assertive that we want a bigger deal than just Ukraine. We want to see NATO push back. We want security guarantees. We want Zelensky out of it completely. All of that is going to be unacceptable. And Rutte, I think, is setting out what the Europeans think they could contribute.
That's another very interesting point in terms of not only Putin and Russia's relationship with Ukraine and ensuring that Ukraine doesn't kind of go over the line past what Putin wants, but also take into consideration, but because of how people like Joe Rogan, who are scared chickens, who think that Putin is going to blow everybody up, he is frightening people like Rogan all across the board that World War III happened because of his nuclear technology. Knowing full well if Putin used nuclear technology, he's cooked too. It doesn't make sense for him to actually use it. With that said, because of that fear, and because of that sentiment that is especially growing on the MAGA side, Putin and his side will think that they have the leverage to not only demand stuff from Ukraine, but also demand stuff from NATO, saying, well, if you don't do what I want, I'm going to send a nuke. It's the same thing as a child who looks at their parents and just not listening, and the child said, well, if you don't do what I say, if you do this, blah, 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 I'm running away. It's the same type of principle. It's just up to Donald Trump to see if he's going to really bite or not. We shall see.
And what the line should be. The world is converging very vaguely at the moment on some sort of truce sometime in the new year. It's pretty vague at the moment, lots of ideas around, which we could talk about. We're not clear what this would look like, even if all parties agree. But we're beginning to converge on the idea that there will be a ceasefire sometime in the new year.
As you said, lots of ideas around, one of them coming out of Stuart's interview with Zelensky last week. How easy is it? How quick would it be? And how likely is it that there would be a NATO security guarantee of the ground that Ukraine still holds today?
There won't be NATO membership, and that's for sure. But Zelensky is saying we have to have NATO membership because we have to have Article 5. The Article 5 guarantee that an attack on one is an attack on all. But there are a lot of ideas going around to say, well, supposing you have bilateral guarantees, and here we get to the real meat of it, supposing British and French and German and other troops, even Polish troops, were involved in holding a line, a ceasefire line, that would, and there would be, in effect, a tripwire. The Economist was talking about this rather cleverly last week. It would be a tripwire. So it looked like it would be an Article 5 guarantee in all but name. The question there is, are we brave enough to do it? Would we do it, and would we mean it? So people are exploring ideas. You can't have NATO membership, but maybe we can give you some sort of arrangement that will be as good as that guarantee that the Russians wouldn't dare to take us on if we were holding the line. We, some Western countries, were holding the line. There's a long way to go before we get to that, but that's the...
It's a very fascinating solution. So the general idea that was said here is that instead of implement or bringing them into NATO and implementing Article 5 that basically says, if you attack one of our countries, we are going to cook you. You are screwed. You mess with my homie, we're going to jump you. Instead of that for Ukraine, they're going to place some of their people, some of their gang members at a certain point, at kind of the border point of Russia and Ukraine. And if Russia goes past that point and then they threaten the gang, man, they stepped into their territory. They fucked with the wrong people. And because they stepped in there to try to get to them, even though they're not with us, but you stepped on our territory to get to them, that means we're beefing. So I think that's very interesting of a solution, but the question is, how much of an incentive will there be for Western countries to take on that task, right? I guarantee that Donald Trump will not be sending any soldiers towards that kind of international line, right? I think you can maybe argue France. He brought up Germany. He brought up Poland. It really needs to be one country, but I don't think it'll be Americans. Super fascinating, though. I think it's an interesting solution. Regardless, I don't think Russia will buy it, but they won't be technically a part of Ukraine, but they do know the semantics behind it. And maybe they will consider, well, I know there's a reach around, so as long as they're not officially, I can find a way to get through it. Ultimately, I do think there's going to be ulterior motive when it comes to Putin.
The line of thinking, if there is to be a stable truce, then somebody has to hold that line. And it's a long line, 600 miles, 1,000 kilometers. If there isn't somebody holding the line, this truce won't hold. Because we all know the Russians, if they get the idea if they're given a ceasefire, they will be back for more. I promise you, I can promise you that Putin fully intends to take the whole of Ukraine at some time, unless he's prevented from doing so by significant power.
So if that is as effective...
That's another really good point, and that I don't think is considered enough. Like, people say, oh, let's end this conflict, let's have the ceasefire. We need to be realistic. Unless there is actual guarantees of Ukraine's safety, Russia will try to do it again. And again. And again. Because it wants Ukraine. So, I don't know. I also heard this other thing. I'm going to actually bring this to the table. That, oh man, I actually heard this one thing from Destiny. I believe I can pull this up. I'm going to actually edit this out because I actually want to pull this up. So I'm gonna go look for it. So here's the clip, taking it from Destiny, of course, because what he said here, I 100% agree with. And I think sometimes when it comes down to Americans and people from the West, there's a certain level of ignorance and privilege that people are not taking into account when they give their opinions and their perceptions of things that are taking place, thinking that they're even relatively the same in terms of opportunity, in terms of freedoms, and when it comes to other countries around the world. So Destiny here is talking about the Ukraine-Russia situations and why people are fighting in the Ukraine conflict. And it's not simple as, you know, who's living, who's dying, and, oh, we just got to stop the fighting.
to think about it. It's like, okay, well, am I going to die or am I going to live, or is this person going to die or live? And that's it. Okay. Right. When you look at, and there's broader narratives here that even I don't understand because I'm not a part of it, because I don't have that lived experience. So I'm very, very, very loosely going by what people say. Okay. But Eastern Europe has fought for legitimacy. Places like Poland have fought for legitimacy to be included in the Western world for decades. Okay. This idea of breaking from the Soviet Union, of being your own country. Like, we are a people. We are more than just foreign workers for British people. We're more than just temporary visa stays, to work in the summer and then go back to our shitty Eastern European countries. Like, we want to fight our corruption. We want to join the rest of the world. We want to be real countries with real people that are free of like corrupt and crazy leaders and bureaucrats that are trying to we're constantly like, we're trying to become a thing, okay? And Ukraine has been historically a country that's had a lot of issues with corruption and a lot of issues with trying to break from that stereotype of Eastern European destitution. And they were on the path to doing that. And they had a leader who was, the populist support was, hey, we're finally going to have access to European markets. We're finally going to make a deal with the European Union. We're finally moving in that direction. And then they had a leader who was like, actually, no, we're going to go back to Russia, get and as a result of like all the protests and all of the riots and all of this, they have their huge 2014 Euromaidan. And basically what they see in front of them is, oh, it's business as usual. Here comes Russia. There goes Crimea. And now we're back in this world where we're going to be subjugated by Russia. We're not a Western country. We're not even a real country. We're a group of fucking losers who nobody else in the rest of the world wants to help or do anything for. Obama's not doing for us. The West, Europe isn't doing for us. And now Russia's with our shit again. And this is a group of people who desperately want their own country, and they want to have a country that they can be a part of, that they can be proud of, that they can have a narrative and a place on the world stage, who slowly see themselves being eaten and consumed by the Soviet Union again. So to look at those people and go like, well, isn't it bad? Like, a lot of you guys have died. You should just make peace. Like, that's easy to say as an American with your own country, your own government, your own elected leaders. You have a story. You have all of that. That's a completely separate thing to look at Ukrainians who are bleeding away whole sections of their country, while the rest of the world stands by and watches, and they'd be like, shouldn't you guys just stop because there's so many of you dying? Like, do you understand how horrible that is? Like, it's such a Western take. Not to say that death is good, but there's something more at play here. There has to be something more at play than just some people dying, because that's what's moved nations and peoples, is more than just like a concern for an individual or even just your family or even just your neighborhood. It's like this cause for an entire country, right?
Can I tell you?
Hey, man, that's who's cooking. I don't really have much else to say because I agree to all the points that he's talking about, but just wanted to show you guys that. Just wanted you guys to hear that because I think that is very important to consider when it comes down to these conversations. Now, to kind of wrap up, there's a couple more topics that I want to bring to your attention. We have Dinesh D'Souza, creator of the controversial film 2000 Mules. Initially, I was like, hey, sure, let's see what it is. It's from made it on the Daily Wire show. I watched What Is a Woman, and it was like, oh, sure, whatever. This was also put on that Daily Wire show, and he apologized. He did a public apology for inaccurately portraying Mark Andrews. Shout out the Ravens. It's not that Mark Andrews. It's a Georgia man featured in the film, and the movie suggested that Andrews was involved in illegal ballot harvesting during the 2020 election. But it was later revealed that the footage shown was not connected to geolocation data as originally claimed. D'Souza apologized directly to Andrews and acknowledged the mistake. So D'Souza created a documentary was wronged and ruined someone's life, but I do respect that he apologized for it. But I also don't respect that you felt confident enough in this fraudulent election case to put out a documentary with not verifiable evidence in your documentary itself. That is lazy and that is pathetic. So I don't respect that. And you had to apologize for it, which it's good you did. But next time, have more evidence. Don't call something a documentary when it's just opinions based off nothing verifiable. So that's just my thing about it. Also, the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation Leadership changes. I didn't have to read that title out, but I got you, ladies and gentlemen. You know what makes this very interesting is that the previous person who's the FBI director, Christopher Wray, must either resign or get fired. Wray was appointed by Trump in 2017. Donald Trump put Wray as the FBI director, but because this man wasn't 100% loyal to Trump, he was only like 65% loyal to Trump. He got fired. And now they're hiring some guy named Kash Patel. Kash Patel also said, "We're going to come after the people in the media who lied about American citizens who helped Joe Rogan or Joe Biden rig presidential elections. Whether it's criminally or civilly, we'll figure that out." So this man who's already been selected has said that he's going to go after media members for rigging the election. Yeah, that's going to go over well. So that's Kash Patel. Trump also chose Jared Isaacman to run NASA. Little things about Isaacman, I didn't find anything controversial, but I was like, okay, what is his time? Because Trump has only chosen loyalists or his friends or his donors, people like that. Isaacman is a friend of Musk, and his online payment company Shift4 has extensive financial ties to SpaceX. According to financial disclosure documents, Shift4 had invested $27 million in SpaceX as of 2021. So you can see the ties. He's close friends with Musk and put millions of dollars in Musk's company. So it's not a surprise he was chosen to run NASA. And the final thing that I want to say is that unfortunately the CEO of United Healthcare was fatally shot. What appears to be a premeditated attack. It's kind of crazy that the stuff like that is still happening. But that is all the news we got. A little bit of a shorter episode. I want to get through all the information, of course, for today's podcast. But I want you guys to keep a note that moving forward, Wednesdays and Saturdays, podcasts will be dropping 8 a.m. EST. We'll continue pushing the conversation. We'll continue to push the solutions without political bias. And again, I'm open for conversation, so feel free to reach out. So appreciate everybody, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you guys have a good one. Take care and peace.